Coming out for this important event. Every once in a while, of course, in our lives, we get this opportunity to participate in something called democracy, and it's a privilege, and it's an honor, it's our responsibility, and it truly is an act of activism on your part to come out to this one in particular on an issue that is so critical in this time. My name is Kevin Lindsay, and I am the chair of the Nanaimo Climate Action Hub. I'm in this is more comfortable. A little heavy, I'll get a little arm workout while I'm at it. Let me tell you a little bit about NCAH. Nanaimo Climate Action Hub came to be around 4 years ago, and has done some amazing work in this community. We are a volunteer-driven, completely volunteer-driven organization. We are a couple hundred members strong. We also communicate with three or four times that many people through our monthly newsletter, people who want to know what we're doing here in Nanaimo and the successes that we're having here in this wonderful place with regard to climate action. So we're very focused on local climate solution advocacy. The word hub in our name means that we try to connect with as many organizations that are doing great work in the Nanaimo area as possible, and there are many. And some of you are represented here today, so we really appreciate all of you. Before we go too much further, I want to just make a couple of announcements and also acknowledge that we're gathering here from around this wonderful area and an area that has been inhabited and stewarded by the Tsumenis and the Sununawis and the Snuneymuxw First Nations for millennia, for thousands of years. And we're at this pivotal moment in time when we're needing to make very important decisions about how we continue to steward this wonderful land and these seas, and ensure that generations of people, not only here but everywhere around the globe, will continue to live and breathe and be safe and all of those things that we have enjoyed in our lives. So a couple of little brief announcements and appreciations. So I mentioned the washrooms earlier. I think you now know where they are. We've been here long enough. Some of you came quite early, so you probably visited them. But I also I want to appreciate you both for being here and say that. We're going to say that probably a number of times. It takes a great amount of commitment and courage to do what they're doing. It's a knock-on. Absolutely. To put yourselves out there, to put your neck on the line, to go knocking on doors and sometimes get those doors slammed in your face, it's not always fun, I'm sure. So we want to appreciate you very much. And again, as I said, appreciate all of you for showing up and just the action that you're taking by being here. That's really all I want to say, because now it's my pleasure to introduce today's moderator. Dr. Heather Bates is a fantastic climate activist that you're all going to get to know more throughout the course of this program today. She is a psychologist here in Nanaimo. She's a mom, and as I mentioned, she's such a committed climate activist that she co-founded the Nanaimo Climate Action Hub a few years ago. And it has been my pleasure to work with you over the last couple of years. I also want to mention we have a number of people from our board here, so just stick up your hand if you're on the NCAH board. We also have people who are involved in other ways, Michael and Shelley and others who are organizers. Thank you to all of you. But without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Heather and on with the show.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate your leaving the microphone at my altitude here. taking a couple minutes to connect as we start and get ready to hear from our amazing candidates today. So just for a moment, I'd like everyone to turn to somebody that you do not already know who is sitting near you. Just say hello, introduce yourself, maybe say why you came tonight. All right, so my first couple of questions are for the audience today. Candidates have a couple more minutes before they're in the spotlight. Please raise your hand if climate is among your top 3 election issues. Okay, good. Most of us are in the right place today. How about if it's your number 1 issue in this election? Okay, quite a few. All right. We're noting this, good. And do we have any undecided voters in the audience today? Anybody who might still be swayed? How about first-time voters? Anybody going to the polls first time? Thank you for showing up. Okay. So we did want to let you all know that we did invite all 3 candidates who were running in the Nanaimo-Lantzville electoral district. We were thrilled to initially receive a yes RSVP from Gwen O'Mahony of the Conservative Party, and very disappointed to later get a reply after we'd sent the questions. Ahead of time, we did get a reply back with declining the RSVP. So we are very appreciative of the 2 candidates who did want to take the time and again put themselves out there to talk about this very important subject. The format for today is we're going to have 2-minute opening statements from each of the candidates. Following this, we will have 11 questions. Those have been provided to the candidates ahead of time. And each candidate will have 2 minutes for their initial response to the question. And then each candidate will have the option of taking 1 minute to offer a rebuttal before we move to the next question. And at the end, they will also have 2 minutes to make a closing statement. So we are likely to be wrapping up probably by about 10 past 12, depending on whether the candidates use the full allocated time. And just requesting that polite applause is absolutely fine and welcome. We do ask that you refrain from any negative comments being shouted out during the discussion or any interruptions to the candidates while they're speaking. And we're looking forward to a spirited yet respectful discussion today. So without further ado, we did a coin toss earlier. And as I recall, it was George who would go first on the opening statements. Am I remembering that right? Yes. Okay, great. So I'll turn it over to you, George. And Deanna will indicate when you have 30 seconds remaining and when your time is up. Please go ahead.
Thank you for that. And thank you everyone for being here today. Again, as I mentioned to the organizers of this event, it is fantastic that we're having a conversation and a debate solely based on climate change. This is one of the biggest crises that are facing everyone. Every single person in this room is impacted by what's happening with climate change. And I can say, as a candidate on this stage, that climate change is real, 100%. A little bit about me is I was born and raised in Nanaimo. I went to school in the South End. I went to John Barsby. I went to Vancouver Island University. And I also just happened to be a former city councillor and regional district director in this community. Nanaimo's my home, I love it, and I want it to realize its potential. And that is the reason that I'm running in this election, is to be able to be part of making our community a better place, like I did when I was a city councillor back from 2011 to 2014. But as we're here today talking about climate change, and I've mentioned already, we are facing big challenges. This government's been focused on making sure that we make changes that ensure that we leave a future for future generations. That when I think of my niece and nephews, that they also have a place to be able to live that isn't 40 degrees Celsius, that we're dealing with heat domes and atmospheric rivers. It's so important that we talk about this and we make action on this very important topic today rather than tomorrow. So again, I'm looking forward to this discussion with everyone today. There's a real risk if the Conservatives end up in government, but again, we'll have that discussion today. It's unfortunate they're not here, but Leah and I will share our thoughts on climate change. So thank you all for being here today.
We forgot to remind folks, if you can silence your phones, please, that would be much appreciated. And as we're doing that, thank you, George, and over to Leah for your opening statement. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you to the organizers of this event. And thank you to the peoples who have lived here for time immemorial. It is amazing that we still have this incredible, idyllic place in which we live. You can see my name, Leah Versaville. I am a longtime inhabitant of the island. I moved out here from Alberta in 1971. Graduated from Claremont High School down in Saanich in 72. And I have mentioned a few times that the speaker at our high school graduation was none other than Mr. Suzuki, who came and kind of set us all on a path of activism, I think, and love and care for our environment, particularly this place where we are today. We're in a brand new riding. Somebody got out the Sharpie and redrew the lines, and here we are. So this is also an important event in the sense that we are now on the cusp of something where we can create a new riding with a significant voice in the legislature. I did also graduate from UVic and Royal Roads. I currently work part-time for VIU. I'm a member of the Fish and Game Club here in Nanaimo. I'm also a member of the Legion and the Lions Clubs. I also work part-time for the Canadian Corps of Commissionaires here, which has been an incredible opportunity to learn how the infrastructure of this island and the Port Authority works. This election, particularly from the Green perspective, is putting people first. It's putting you first. It's putting our children coming up first. Not only the people who vote for us, but all of us. We are an inclusive and representative and diverse party with strong roots in British Columbia. Oh, is that my end card? Sorry.
Thank you, Leah. Our first question, which will go to Leah first, is, what are your plans to prevent further deaths, destruction of property, and economic loss caused by the climate crisis? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Heather. We are in some ways fortunate that we have not seen the full brunt yet of climate catastrophes. We have seen flooding, of course, back in 2021 that devastated a lot of infrastructure on the island. We are witnessing more and more forest fires and the smoke that comes to this island from various other places in the province and also across the water from the United States. Every summer we're facing droughts. Every summer we're having worries about increasing heat. Every day we turn on the radio in the summertime, we're hearing it's the hottest day ever recorded. This is probably a motivator for a lot of us to be involved in this forum today. We can't ignore this, and we can't pretend that climate change isn't real. It's affecting us in terms of our expenses. I know that my house insurance has gone up astronomically, almost doubled in the last 5 years. And I'm sure that this is the case for many other people. So we need to act locally. And one of the platforms of the Green Party is to emphasize the strength of communities like this. Even though Nanaimo has been divided into 2 ridings, we have populations from the Lantzville area as well as from the city of Nanaimo and across the RDM, where we must establish working relationships with all levels of government to tackle this crisis. We cannot simply do this alone. Thank you.
Over to you, George.
I've said this earlier, we're in a crisis. Climate change, the issues that are arising from it are not 10 years away. They're here right now, and we're seeing them every day. When I was a kid, I didn't hear about forest fires. I remember being in elementary school and we were sending the Mars bombers to Australia. 2013, what are we seeing? We're seeing fires. Port Alberni, waking up to orange skies with ash on people's cars. This is a very real issue that's facing our communities today. I had the fortune of reading this book called If Science is to Save Us, and the premise of that book is whether or not we have a duty to be a good ancestor. This is the first time in history that we know if we do A, this is going to be the outcome. And that's what this government is doing. It worked with the Green Party to develop a Clean BC plan to try to fix some of these issues and slow climate change. We need to start building fire-proof communities, such as if we look to what's happening out on Sugarloaf Mountain and Lindley Valley. Those are areas that we need to be concerned about. If there's a fire, it's a real concern. We've seen firefighters who've died. We've seen so many people through the heat dome who passed away as a result of temperatures that we have not seen in British Columbia. So this government's been focused on helping fruit tree growers to make sure that they can continue to do their business. We've continued to work with farmers to ensure that they have irrigation systems. Again, that's the type of action that we need to be taking, not allowing ourselves to be in a place where the BC Conservatives could end up in government and roll back all of these changes, because we need to make sure that we're fighting for the future.
Okay, everybody hearing all right? Good, thumbs up at the back? Okay. Leah, would you like to make a 1-minute rebuttal?
Well, not so much a rebuttal as a cautionary tale. I believe that one of the most important things that we can do is to educate, and I'm so glad that there are young people here today, but as a lifelong learner, we can all continue to learn. I also believe that as role models, we can have an incredible influence on our communities. We can take action to ensure that we do not have climate deniers in our legislature, on our city councils, on the RDM, or anywhere in our governance.
George, would you like to make a rebuttal? All right, thank you. Question 2. BC broke yet another record in 2023, paying over $1.1 billion to fight climate change-driven forest fires. Are you in support of legally seeking compensation for a fair share of the harm caused by the fossil fuel industry, i.e. suing big oil, as California, New Jersey, and other US states are doing? If not, What is your solution to prevent taxpayers from bearing all of the costs of climate change? George, you're up first on this one.
Thank you for the question. And I can tell you as a commercial lawyer, lawsuits are not a great thing. It costs a lot of money, and I can tell you we can't sue our way out of the climate crisis that we're in. Money is certainly something that we need to be able to ensure that we can fireproof communities and invest in the future, but we need to actually implement policies. And so that's why we're working with our Clean BC Plan, one that we developed alongside the Green Party to actually take action for communities. We need to adapt for the future. So that's why this BC NDP government has put in policies to allow for people to have access to heat pumps. We've made sure that people have access to air conditioners. We have made sure that polluters are paying. These are the type of policies that we need to be enacting right now. We needed to do this 20 years ago. And instead, this BC NDP government has said, we're going to put in strong policies against big polluters to ensure that they pay. So perhaps there might be a discussion about this in the future, but what David Eby and the BC NDP is focused is that they're actually going to take action. And they've demonstrated it through policies such as Clean Energy BC. So that's my answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Leah.
Thank you. And again, I would echo George's remarks around lawsuits. They are not free. They are expensive. They polarize people. And they still cost the taxpayers money. So that is not where I would go first. I believe that our first course of action needs to be to stop subsidizing all fossil fuel industries. This won't happen. This won't happen tomorrow. I totally understand that. And it won't happen probably within the term of this legislature. However, we need to stop expanding LNG. We need to stop fracking. Someone stole my line out there. We absolutely need to have a rethink on how we proceed as a clean and green working community and a clean and green working province. We have the capacity to put money back into the pockets of British Columbians and Canadians, for that matter, through the carbon tax. And in fact, at the moment, more than 65% of households in British Columbia are seeing that benefit. We cannot have political parties in power who are talking about axing that tax. That is just silly. I completely agree with George around the actions that have been initiated, largely with the BC Greens prompting the NDP to take action back when we had a coalition. And I actually hope that in the future that there will be continued coalitions amongst like-minded parties, because I think that even though we do not have proportional representation, we're better working together.
George, would you like the 1 minute?
Yes, thank you. Again, Leah and I think, are going to agree on a number of things today, because we actually believe that climate change exists. That's the risk in this election, is that you have people like John Rostad who are saying, how did we convince carbon-based beings that carbon is the problem with climate change? The reason is because we listen to science, we listen to experts, and we listen to evidence, and it's clear. There's no question about it that we are in a climate emergency. And again, what we need to do is implement policies that will combat climate change to the best that we can. And that's through the policies that the BC NDP have already been doing, such as making sure that people can adapt in this climate emergency.
would you like to respond?
No, thank you.
Okay. Next question. This one goes to Leah first. How can BC meet our climate commitments when the provincial government plans to double the amount of fracking with multiple liquid natural gas or LNG proposals? You have 2 minutes.
Well, that's a really simple answer. We can't. It can't happen. As long as we are continuing to expand fossil fuel production, we are going down the wrong road. And I would like to point out that the question really should have been the former provincial government, because I think that we are in for a sea change. I can't help but notice when I go to forums like this, and when I'm knocking on doors and just doing my life, that people are keenly aware that we are in a crisis. Economically, weather, climate, our communities are facing challenges that we have never before had to deal with. I notice in particular the number of people who are unhoused. It's frightening. And it's not just people who do not have shelter, but people who are largely migrating from couch to couch, or from sister to brother to child. We have to stop this runaway train. We cannot continue to expand LNG, and we cannot continue to allow fracking in this province.
Go ahead, George.
The question was, how can we ensure we meet our climate commitments? The way that we can make sure we meet our climate commitments is by electing people who actually believe in climate change. Again, John Ristad's going around saying, and his candidates are saying that climate change is a conspiracy that, sorry, it just blows my mind thinking about it, but is a conspiracy solely there to suppress the population and starve people. I know that's not the case when I know how hot it is outside, when I see the fires and people losing their homes. So the thing for the BC NDP is that we are on track to meet our commitments, especially that if you look to 2014, that we will have reduced emissions by 45%. And that's significant. And we also have non-governmental organizations such as Pembina and the Environmental Defence Fund saying that our plan with Clean BC is actually moving us in the right direction, and we're making significant progress. So again, there's much more that needs to be done, and I can tell you if I have the great privilege of being elected to be your MLA here in Nanaimo-Lantzville, that I will stand up for climate change every single day to make sure that our community and British Columbians are protected.
Thank you. Leah, would you like a 1-minute rebuttal?
Yes, thank you. With all due respect, George, I think that this previous government has had some shortcomings. When we were in a cooperative relationship at the beginning of the previous term, there were some positive and productive conversations and results taking place. We have seen increased clear-cutting. We have seen continued compromises of our water. We are entering an era where we simply cannot take half measures. We need to be bold and aggressive in our attack on this climate emergency.
George, would you like to respond? Okay. This next question is a 2-part question, and it will go to George first. How will you communicate a sense of emergency and tell the truth about the severity of the climate crisis to the public? Will you support binding pollution targets that reflect that urgency?
I can tell you, as a young person in this community, as someone who believes in climate change, that it is real. I've said it before and I'll say it again, that climate change is the biggest emergency that this entire species faces. The fact is that there are people who aren't born today who are going to feel the impacts of the decisions that we are making. And we need to make purposeful, strong decisions that will make sure that the future generations have the same type of privileges that we have. And that's, again, I look to the plan that the BC NDP worked alongside the Green Party to implement. And that's one that's being supported by the Environmental Defence Fund. And just so you know, these aren't organizations that are funded by the NDP. They're ones that are independent organizations saying the BC NDP's plan for the environment is making significant progress. And that's something that we should be proud of. Sure, Leah, I agree with you. There is much more that we need to do, but that work won't continue if we have a BC Conservative government. A BC Conservative government with candidates who are saying that climate change doesn't exist. I think it's very telling that the BC Conservative candidate isn't here today, because who's going to stand up in the legislature and talk about these issues? It's definitely going to be me if I happen to be elected, but the person who's not here right now isn't going to stand up for them. They're not going to stand up for future generations, and they're not going to make commitments to ensure that we get to where we need to be as a province. So again, when it comes to that, BC Hydro's call for power has looked at solar power, wind energy. That's what we need to be doing, looking at renewables, and that's what this government has already been doing and will continue to do into the future.
Thank you. Over to you, Leah. You have 2 minutes.
Communicating a sense of emergency involves, as I was saying earlier, an education process. And this is not news. Climate emergency has been talked about for years and years and years. It was 2019 when thousands of scientists came together to talk about the catastrophic situation. In fact, they labeled it Code Red. This is taking too long to address, quite frankly. When thousands of scientists are telling us, and we believe as a party in science, we believe in empirical evidence. We are not making things up as we go along. We are insisting that it is the polluters who pay. We must not put this on the back of individual taxpayers and of children and generations to come. It's an education process, but it's not fear-mongering. This is just reality. We are in a position to take bold action, and that is what we must do. We must be careful that we do not alienate one another, because no matter what happens, we are all on this planet together.
Thank you. George, would you like a 1-minute response? Okay. And Leah, would you like your additional 1-minute response? Okay. Next question will go to Leah first. Are you prepared to spend what it takes, on the order of 2% of BC's gross domestic product, or GDP, to drive down greenhouse gas emissions and increase BC's contribution to the global effort to avoid the worst impacts of climate change?
With respect to the organizers and the people who wrote the questions, I want to just first say that I believe that using GDP as a concept to calculate the expense categories is the wrong formula. Although I absolutely agree that we have to get behind this and that we need to put the money where it counts, I am concerned that using GDP as a measure is a false economy. GDP is defined by adding consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. This concept implies that we will continue to consume and consume and consume at unmanageable rates. We look at the number of ships coming into our harbors. We look at the risk that is placed not only in terms of the wildlife, but in terms of human life and potential catastrophes with this increased shipping. We need to refocus. We need to reduce consumption, but this can be done in a positive way. We know that we can create better hubs of food production here on the island. We can encourage more local production and more seasonal production of food. We know that we can encourage the groups that are working on food recovery programs. We know that the nonprofits like Loaves and Fishes and the Wisteria Society locally, the Lions Clubs, the Rotary, the Kinsmen, all of these non-governmental agencies are putting behind feeding people in our communities and avoiding catastrophe.
Thank you, Leah. Over to you, George.
Thank you. The question was about how do we avoid the worst impacts of climate change, and that's what this BC NDP government has been doing. It's investing in tackling this crisis, and that's by following this Clean BC plan, capping emissions with big polluters, because we know big polluters, those in the oil and gas sector and so on, are huge, significant contributors to climate change. It's getting people to adapt. Again, making concrete actions such as a heat pump plan, air conditioners. Again, we also need to be doing more with wind, solar, which again, I hate to say it, is something that we have non-governmental organizations saying, the NDP is doing this. We've worked with the Green Party to make sure that we have a plan that people support and ensures that we have a credible future where we are slowing down the impacts of climate change. We saw what happened in Lytton. We've seen what's happened in Port Alberni. We've seen this across British Columbia, across the world, and we need to do something now, which is why we need to continue to work with industry to make sure that they stop polluting, and that we also make sure that every single one of us who's in this room right now is doing what we can to reduce our contributions to this climate emergency. Because at the end of the day, you can talk about GDP and so on, but there are no jobs on a dead planet, and nobody is living on this planet if we don't have a healthy environment.
Thank you, George. Would you like to make a rebuttal, Leah?
Yes, I'll just take another minute to emphasize that the Green Platform, which is available for everyone to see on the website, is a fully costed platform. We have put dollars besides initiatives so that you can see exactly what piece of the pie is being committed to which programs and services. 2% of our budget, and again, BC generally works on about an $85 billion budget every year, is a reasonable amount to expect us to contribute to this initiative. We absolutely must support one another in every way to build livable, workable, walkable communities locally so that we can all continue to access the services that we need closer to home, so that, again, we are reducing our carbon footprint in having to travel far away to access services. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, and I think that's something that this government's been doing, and actually I did it when I was a City Councillor and Regional District Director. I helped pass a 40-year transportation master plan that was focused on ensuring that we had walkable communities. Before I was the chair of that transportation master planning process, the plan was focused on building more roads. And when I became chair, I said we need to change that model to make sure that pedestrians are first. Because before anyone does anything, whether they get on a bike, get on transit, they're a pedestrian. And so back when I started this plan, We were talking about mobility hubs, and this government is now talking about transit-oriented zones to make sure people can walk to the grocery store, that people can walk to their jobs. Make sure that we are doing what we can to reduce our impacts on the environment.
Thank you. This next question will go to George first. What policies would you propose to ensure BC is better protecting those who are more vulnerable during extreme weather events, particularly the elderly, people with disabilities, and people who are unhoused?
For many of you, I'm not sure if you're aware, but this government's announced a new long-term care facility in Lantzville to ensure that seniors have the care that they need. That, again, it's one of the challenges that we're facing right now, is that there isn't enough long-term care facilities when we look to our health care. So that's ensuring that seniors are protected. In the heat dome that we experienced a couple of years ago, the majority of the individuals that passed were seniors, and that's because we didn't have buildings that had appropriate climate control within the buildings. And so that's why we've given out heat pumps, we've given out air conditioners, and we'll continue to do more of that into the future. Further, it's identifying and supporting at-risk communities, as Leah's mentioned as well. There's a number of people throughout our communities who just don't have proper access to the services that they need when it comes to regulating themselves during these climate emergencies. So that's why we made sure that there's cooling stations for people who are unhoused as well. Again, these are the type of actions that will help ensure that we make sure that we get to a point of dealing with this climate crisis in a way that helps every single British Columbian.
Thank you, Heather. Some of the policies that the Green Platform is emphasizing at this point is the basic livable income, which comes down to ensuring, for example, that the rates that are paid to those needing to live on income assistance or on PWD, persons with disabilities, is increased. The cost of food, the cost of housing, the cost of everything requires that we do not further marginalize people who are in a position where they must resort to these programs. We also need to improve and have laid out a policy around increasing the safer grants to seniors so that people who are unable to find below market housing, and there is a dearth of availability of that kind of housing, particularly in this riding, will have access to affordable spaces in which they can live. This also emphasizes the mobility of these marginalized populations. People who are unable to get to warming centers or unable to get to cooling centers are those people who, unfortunately, as in the last heat dome that we experienced, resulted in loss of life, more than 600 British Columbians. And again, largely a senior population, which is unacceptable. We need to emphasize that the access to these places, warming and cooling centers, but also mobility in general, is improved. And to that end, we have put forward a platform around free transit and also improving the accessibility of that transit. We simply cannot leave people to fend for themselves. We must identify them, and as loving and caring communities, we must reach out. Thank you.
Thank you. George, would you like a rebuttal? Leah, would you like a 1-minute response to George's comments? A bit strange having a rebuttal to yourself. Okay, less than half of the priority old growth areas recommended by the government-appointed technical advisory panel back in 2021 and agreed to by the government have actually been deferred. What will you do to ensure their immediate deferral? And this we go to Leah first.
Unfortunately, when we are at the cusp of an election and political promises are being thrown about, we tend to believe that perhaps things will get better. Unfortunately, things only get better when we take firm action and we hold people to their promises. We hold the former government to the promises that were made in terms of logging practices. The platform, again, and I know I keep coming back to this, but I'm sending you away with a homework assignment to read it, is around preserving community forests and improving our logging practices. We do not need to clear cut. This is an archaic practice that does not only remove the marketable timbers, but destroys biospheres, destroys every living thing in its path. This cannot continue.
Thank you, and to you, George.
Would you mind just reading the first part of the question for me?
Sure.
Thank you.
Less than half of the priority old growth areas recommended by the government-appointed technical advisory panel back in 2021 and agreed to by the government have actually been deferred. What will you do to ensure their immediate deferral?
Thank you. So again, our forests are very important, and I can tell you I actually agree with you that we need to make sure that we take firm action. And let me tell you what some of that firm action is by this BC NDP government. Is saving 2.4 million hectares of old growth forests. Working more firm action is working with Indigenous communities to make sure that we're protecting rare forests and allowing them to lead on their territory. That's making partnerships with Indigenous communities rather than having a top-down approach of saying we know best. Again, more firm action is making sure that we're conserving land by 2030. You probably all know where I'm going right now, but John Ristad said we're actually conserving too much. I would drop my microphone right now, but the thing is I need it for later. But the fact is that even people from the Endangered Ecosystem Alliance said that with respect to this NDP government, that they should be given huge kudos for the work that they're doing. So we are taking firm action, and I can assure you that should the BC NDP be elected on October 19th, that will continue to take firm action.
Leah, would you like to respond?
I believe that one of the missing pieces in that prior arrangement to preserve 2.4 hectares, was that hectares? Million hectares, sorry, lost that million in there. Has overlooked the fact that we need to have dates and timelines included. We also need to realize that we cannot continue to act as a colonial government. We need a governance-to-governance model where we appreciate and embrace and endorse the working operations that Indigenous communities, not only here on the island, but throughout the province, have championed for millennia. We know what happened at Fairy Creek. It's continuing. We know that we cannot have climate activists arrested and thrown in jail and blocking up the court system for years. We cannot allow this to continue.
Next question George first. Increasing the consumption of plant-based foods and reducing food waste are very effective ways of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. What would you do to incentivize and promote these behavior changes and initiatives?
We all saw during the pandemic the issues that arose during with our supply chain. People weren't able to access food, and I can tell you, back when I was on council, we worked with Loaves and Fishes to ensure that they actually had the vehicle to be able to pick up food that might otherwise not be used in our communities. That's what our council did in the day, and that was something that I supported, and we need to do more of that. Do I wish that we didn't have food banks? 100%, because that would mean we are in the place that we need to be. But for the time being, we need to be working with people like Loaves and Fishes, working with local hospitals, farmers markets, and also with Indigenous communities to ensure that there's food sovereignty. Because again, what we've seen across Indigenous communities is very sad, and I think that we obviously need to do more as a government, and we are doing more. And we're looking at ways to be able to ensure that there is more incentivization towards these organizations so that they can do more of this work in our community, such as Loaves and Fishes and how they have gone about doing so with their cold storage truck that I was part of funding back when I was on council.
Thank you, George. Leah?
Thank you, Heather. This question is talking about incentivizing and promoting behavior changes. And again, education plays such an enormous role, as does role modeling. There are two primary incentives that I would like to put forward in response to this question. One is the cost. We all need to make just one trip to the grocery store or to a farmer's market or to our local producers to realize that plant-based products are far less expensive than those based on meat production. We all know that these farmers markets exist in our communities, and we can do more to support them by putting our dollars in the pockets of our neighbors rather than into corporations. The other side of the incentivizing is simply around health and the benefits of a plant-based diet. If we look at the cost of cardiovascular disease, and we look at the cost and the health damages as a result of diabetes, we know that these two health considerations have become enormous concerns, not only in this community, but across North America. We need to emphasize that in new builds, we have green roofs, we have wastewater collection systems, and recycling of gray and brown water to encourage everyone to have their own fruits and vegetables that they can grow, particularly in this amazing climate. We also can incentivize people by working with local governments to change zoning practices around things like keeping chickens, having gardens instead of grass, lawns, and xeriscaping. Thank you.
Leah, would you like your additional minute?
I could go on about this for more than a minute, I can tell you. I also think that, again, around the education and incentivizing plant-based diets, we don't have home economics classes in schools anymore. What happened? People don't know how to cook. People don't know how to can. People don't know how to preserve food. They don't know how to extend the shelf life of what we have. And this is what creates so much waste. And thank goodness we have organizations, George, like Wisteria and Loaves and Fishes, who are repurposing and recycling those foods. I don't know where people would be without them.
question will go to Leah first. More fossil fuels are burned in transportation than any other sector in BC. And improving public transit is one of the best ways of making life more affordable. How would you support the development of green public transportation across the province that is accessible, safe, efficient, and affordable?
I know that politicians sometimes get off track, and I'm going to a little bit, because I know the question is around transportation, and I'm not a politician yet. This really comes back to, again, my emphasis on consumption and on local production. We know that transporting food, in particular, is an enormous expense. We see the numbers of vehicles, big trucks, refrigerated trucks that are coming over from the mainland to bring us food products. And we know, because sometimes the ferries go down or the supply chain is interrupted, that we are probably on a 2 or 3 day leash in terms of our availability of food if these systems fail. We need to emphasize local production. We need to emphasize food security. This is an enormous issue on this island. We also need to somehow encourage stratas and other building codes to allow for cooperative gardens, to allow for more plants rather than lawns, and to allow for reduction in the need to travel great distances to acquire our food and other products that we need. Again, around the consumption issue, there is a huge concern around fast fashion and some of the things that we have brought into our lifestyles. I'm not saying that we all need to go back to growing our own wheat. That would be awkward. However, I think that a minimalist lifestyle and modeling these for our children and our grandchildren is definitely an encouraging way to go.
Over to you, George.
Thank you very much, and I can tell you many young people have often been the ones who have advanced the type of changes that we need in our communities, such as recycling, such as saying that we need to use transit. Often it's been past generations that have said, let's use more fossil fuels, let's use more resources than we need. But that's what government's been focused on, is saying, you know what? Let's make transit free for individuals under 12 years old so that they can make sure that they can get to school, and parents have the ability to also encourage this type of behavior as they get older. Seniors ride for free on BC ferries. We've worked to make electric vehicle stations across British Columbia. There's 155 charging stations, 310 fast chargers. These are the type of good actions that are going to help us transition into a low carbon environment. Again, encouraging healthy communities. When I was on council, we talked about, well actually I talked about, because some people thought, oh, there goes the young person again. But the fact was that I remember when we put in our first bike lane on Dover Road. Some people weren't happy about it, but look where we are now, where people are actually actively using their bikes. We need to be encouraging this type of community, where there was back in a time where people loved going to the local grocer. They loved going and picking up a loaf of bread from the baker. That's a good thing. People shouldn't have to drive from one end of the community to the other to go pick up groceries. And that's what this government's been focused on, making sure that we make communities more accessible, make sure that people have sidewalks, make sure that people have transit available to them. And we've seen that in places like Vancouver, where there's been significant investment in the SkyTrain service as well, so that people can get across to places where they need to without significant encumbrances, such as needing a single passenger occupancy vehicle.
Thank you. Would you like to respond, Leah?
Yes, I would like to just emphasize that there are certainly parts of this new riding that are sidewalk free. And they are that way by choice, especially rural communities like Lantzville, and especially in developments such as the Winds. We find that people have chosen a lifestyle where they appreciate their independence. They appreciate their reliance on their wells. They appreciate their community sense of cooperative behavior. And I think that we can champion this in government as well, by encouraging working relationships with local governments and regional districts and Indigenous communities where we are all on the same page and all moving forward together. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to you, George.
Thank you. Again, one of the things that this government's been focused on is moving our fleets to electric. Also, here in Nanaimo and our school district, we have 2 electric school buses. Like again, we need to do much more work, but the only way that's going to get done is that we ensure that we have elected officials who believe in climate change, and also the only party out of the 2 right here today that's likely going to be able to ensure that that change happens is the BC NDP.
Thank you. This one is for George first. Do you think the province should offer free heat pumps to low and modest income households and to those with heightened heat risk, including the elderly and people with disabilities?
Can I get an extra 2 minutes? Because I'm going to talk about some other things, because I will say this is what this government has been doing. We've been making sure that people have heat pumps. I don't see Larry here, but his heat pump group also successfully advocated for these changes in heat pumps right here in our community. People in Nanaimo advocating for this type of program. Again, we've done it with, we actually surprisingly have the most robust heat pump program in Canada after Prince Edward Island. Again, this BC NDP government's been focused on taking action for people, and I'm going to talk about some other things since I have a bit more time, because we've already been doing this, is that there were more heat pumps sold in British Columbia in 2022 compared to natural gas furnaces. Like, this is, again, taking action for people. We've made sure that children are able to take transit for free. We've made sure that seniors have access to BC ferries. We're making sure that there's changes within our building codes for long-term care facilities so that seniors can live with dignity, and also that they can make sure to withstand this climate emergency that we're going through. Again, we need a government that's focused on, that's laser focused on making sure that we deal with this climate emergency today and not tomorrow. And that's what's at risk with this upcoming election, is that all of that work could be ripped up, and we'd be dealing with more fires, we'd be dealing with more atmospheric rivers, and less services for our communities.
Thank you. Leah?
Yes, I believe that heat pumps are a wonderful thing, and I also think that the provision of AC units, particularly to seniors of modest income, was a good initiative. And we need to keep focusing on the fact that this question around our survivability is multifaceted. We can help people acquire their AC units and their heat pumps, but again, the hydro costs to run these things are sometimes crippling, particularly for people on PWD or income assistance, or people, elders and seniors in our communities. We know that we need to retrofit buildings. We know that we need to work with all levels of government to make sure that our building codes are modified to make sure that we are not continuing down the path that we started in 100 years ago of relying on vehicles that transport only us or our immediate families. We know that the transit platform that the BC Greens has put forward is for free transit across the board, not just for kids under 12. We can champion the provision of free ferry services Monday to Thursday for seniors. However, seniors are traveling every day of the week and are still major contributors to our economies and cannot simply be cast aside. We know that we need to work across the board on every facet of our economy to improve the lifestyle and life expectancy of British Columbians, and we can start that here. We can start that with Nanaimo-Lantzville as a model community. Thank you.
I'll be very quick, because even though this question is about heat pumps, we heard some information about BC Hydro, and again, when it comes to affordability, this government's made sure that there was a $500 credit for people to deal with affordability in our communities. For people with children, we've expanded $10 a day childcare. We've gotten rid of MSP premiums. We've made life better. We've tried to make life better for as many people as possible. We're in an affordability crisis and we're in a climate crisis. But the only way that we're going to make sure that we get it to a better place is by ensuring that we have people who believe in climate change and who are taking action in government to implement these policies. And that's been the NDP consistently, but working alongside institutions like the Environmental Defense Fund, working alongside the Green Party to implement our plan, the BC NDP plan for Clean BC.
Thank you, George. Would you like to respond, Leah?
Well, the question was very specific around heat pumps, but the heading was buildings. And so when we look at buildings, not only in terms of single family dwellings, but also in terms of all of the new building that is going to be required when we start to densify our communities, we need to again emphasize that the structure and layout of these buildings needs to account for the overall occupancy. It's not only, and again, many communities are looking at putting in towers, potentially 3, 4, 5-story buildings for housing, with some aspect of that being affordable suites. However, we need to retrofit and build new builds with the climate crisis foremost in mind. We cannot have this as, oh, but an afterthought. Maybe we should have put in some water cisterns, or maybe we should have had a green roof. We need to ensure right from the get-go that we are looking at every conceivable way to make life affordable for people and survivable into our future. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're at our final question of the morning, which will go to Leah first. As an elected representative, how will you enhance public understanding of the scientific causes and societal implications of global warming, i.e. the climate crisis?
Thank you, Heather. I think, again, this comes back to education. And it comes back to the conversations that we hold with people. It comes back to role modeling. And it comes back to the lifestyles that we choose. We know that there are still people who do not believe that our climate is changing or has changed. We know that there are people who still believe that there are ways that we can avoid what is inevitable. And yet, if we look to the science and we hear messages like the global average temperature today is warmer than it has ever been before, this shouldn't terrorize us and immobilize us. This has to incentivize us. This has to call us to action and to put people in governance positions across the board, not only in our provincial legislature, but in every aspect of our governance that realizes that we are dealing with a real threat. We know that we need to talk to people. We know that we need to convince them to change behavior that is not working for the collective good. We understand that there are communities that have been literally wiped off the face of the earth in the last few days. I look to North Carolina and I look to Nepal. We cannot allow that to continue, and we cannot allow it to happen here. Thank you.
Thank you, George.
As a future MLA, hopefully, of this riding, I would talk to people honestly about the fact that climate change is real. I'm fortunate that I share the stage with someone else who also believes that climate change is real. But there are people in this community, people who want to lead this province, who don't believe it, who say that climate change is a lie, who, after working with non-governmental organizations, working with the Green Party, have established a plan where people are saying, we are making significant progress in British Columbia. The BC Conservatives are talking about ripping that plan up because we don't need to fight climate change. That is a significant problem when we aren't listening to experts, when we're not listening to the evidence. We needed to do something a long time ago, and we need to start acting now, as this government has been doing. And the reality is that on October 19th, there's one of two parties that will be in government. And we need to ensure that whoever is in that government believes in climate change. And I can tell you, as I said it at the beginning of my opening, is that I do believe in climate change. And when I think every day about my nephews and niece and the future that they're going to inherit and the future that I'm going to continue to live in, that we need to be doing things now. And that's what this government has been focused on, is taking action for people and ensuring that we have an environment that is there for people, that ensures that forests are there, that ensures that we have clean water, that we protect watersheds, that we make sure that there are still fishes in our stream. Fish in our stream, my apologies. So again, thank you all so much for being here, because this is what we need to be doing, and this is what is at stake at this election, is our environment.
Leah, would you like a 1-minute response?
Thank you. I am so encouraged when I listen to my grandchildren and nieces and nephews who talk about the fact that they are learning not only about the water cycle, as we did when we went to school, but also now about the nitrogen cycle and the carbon cycle and the impacts that humans are having on environments. I don't think there is an agenda or a conspiracy in terms of teachers who are basically just using the science, the known science, to say, we need to wake up, we need to do things better, we need stewardship of every resource that we have. Water is not an unlimited resource. And kids in particular are showing adults that they believe and champion this cause. We have an obligation to future generations, not just my grandkids and nieces and nephews, not George's nieces and nephews, but for generations to come. And that is why we need bold, aggressive action and not rhetoric. Thank you.
Okay, so we're on to our closing statements. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to wrap this up. We'll begin with George.
I get to open and I get to close, so thank you. First off, I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here today. Again, this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. The fact that we're having a conversation just on climate change is significant, because I think that demonstrates that we're headed in the right direction. The fact is that people like Diane Brennan, who sat on environmental committees, have been doing this for a long time. People like Larry Whaley in our community who are advocating for heat pumps. And let me tell you, Bruni has been riding her bike all over this community. So thank you for taking that action. The fact is, when I was in high school and in university, I said that we don't inherit the earth from our parents, but we borrow it from our grandchildren. And that's the approach that we need to be taking when it comes to our healthcare, when it comes to our economics, everything that we do. There was a time in history where we would build large things, that we would look towards the future and say, you know what, I'm prepared to build something that I might not see the outcome of. And that's what this BC NDP government is doing by investing, ensuring that we have a new medical school in Surrey, by building a BC Cancer Centre here in Nanaimo, by making sure that we have a plan for the future when it comes to our environment, that we ensure that seniors can live with dignity and respect. So that's what's at risk of this election. I don't need to speak more about John Lestad because it's easy for you to go do a Google search and see some of the things that they're talking about. But we need people who are serious, who are going to take serious action on climate change, on the environment, on healthcare. That's what we need right now. And right now, on October 19th, there will only be two parties that will either be government, and it's going to be the BC NDP or the Conservatives. And in this riding specifically, there is a significant risk that the BC Conservatives could win. So I don't want to act as if I'm trying to scare anyone, because you all showed up today to hear us talk about the environment. And I can tell you that if I happen to be elected as the MLA in this riding, I will do everything I can to make sure that I represent this community and the values that I've talked about with respect to the environment. So thank you all.
Thank you, George. And now to Leah for your closing statement.
Thank you, Heather. I think some of you are probably aware of the fact that I have been championing this cause. I became a member of the Green Party more than 10 years ago, and that I have run in both provincial and federal elections as a Green for over a decade. I also ran in the CVRD, but of course not under the Green banner. This is a cause that is near and dear to my heart. I truly believe that the science will take us forward. And I truly believe that the positive, people-first perspective of the Green Party is the one that will take us forward. We may not have had a lot of MLAs or MPs as representatives of the Green Party in the past, but I believe that we are on the cusp of possibilities and new things and things that can change. People first is our platform. We need to include everyone on this journey, and the Green Party will include everyone. We need to also emphasize the affordability question. Our platform is fully funded, and I encourage you to look and to see how the pie has been divided in terms of what this will cost taxpayers moving forward. None of these initiatives will be free. We need to work hard to make sure that we have a livable, breathable planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leah. Let's have one more warm round of applause for George Anderson and Leah Versa.
Very brief indeed. So please also thank Heather. You did a fantastic job in moderating. I appreciate your work. And again, I would love to convey my thanks and appreciation for what you're both doing. And this is, I think, what I heard is sort of the level of care and criticality that you're bringing to this issue, both of you. It absolutely makes me feel very good. So thank you all for coming out. this morning and joining us for this very important forum. Again, we're the Nanaimo Climate Action Hub. We would love for you to stay in touch with us and give us the opportunity to stay in touch with you. If you don't already receive our newsletter, please leave your email with us. We also have business cards at the back you could just grab or take a picture of on your way out the door. We would love you to become members. Membership is free. It helps us with all our actions to have a robust membership. When we go and we ask the city, when we ask the province to support the things that are most important to our community, the bigger our community, the stronger our voice. So we really do appreciate that. And we also appreciate your donations. Should you have any spare change you would like to drop in the jar to help us pay for events like this, you know, the Timbits weren't free. And if you would like to transfer us, that is a completely acceptable form of donation as well. NanaimoClimateAction@gmail.com is very happy to receive that e-transfer. And again, it helps us do what we do in the community. Again, we're a volunteer organization and appreciate all of you coming out and the work you do. Rock on, people. Let's do this.